Again, thank you all for coming tonight, and special thank you to Dean Catherine Poulton and the parishioners of St John's Priory for allowing us to have this event in this wonderful building tonight. I'm really looking forward to all the speakers tonight and the publication. I hope you all got one as you came in. It's been the culmination of a lot of work by various people, and we're really excited about it. As the Evans home is to be our future new home, we felt it really important to acknowledge the history of the building, the archaeology, the architecture, and the social history of that building. We wanted to honour its past and bring that past into its future use of the building. And we're really gratified that we're part of bringing a building that has laid dormant for many years back to life. Its future life will be full of wonderful things, art, education, community outreach, and that's our future. We do want to, hopefully through this, the Interim Project, keep this future development alive in the minds of the people of Kilkenny, the elected members, all the people that are going to make a difference in actually realising the project. We've come really far, and of course money is the issue, but we have major promised funds from the government and from the Department of Arts and Fáilte Ireland, and it's just a matter of timing actually when that will be released to us. But we'll be working very hard over the next couple of years on a fundraising plan, capital development, and we'll probably be reaching out to all of you to become a part of that in the future years. But we do want to acknowledge and thank the grants received from the Built Heritage and Architectural Policy section of the Department of Arts, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, which allowed us to pursue this research, and also the European Regional Development Fund through the Ireland Wales Programme 2007-2013, and thanks to Lindsay Butler for allowing us to participate in that. It's made a big difference to us. We'll thank all of the various groups that are speaking later. We look forward to a nice evening of opening the memories of Evans Home, and I hope you enjoy. So thanks so much. Over to Lisa and Barbara Ann. Thank you.
So just to introduce the first speakers, Barbara Ann is the Education Curator at the Butler Gallery, and Lisa Cassidy is an architectural researcher based in Dublin. She has a blog called Built Dublin, which has won big in the Irish Blogger Awards this year. But Lisa has been doing an oral history project where she's been recording people speaking about, and you'll hear some of them speaking about Evans Home and their memories of it, and I know that some of the people who spoke are also here, so I'll hand it over to you both.
So as we just get set up there, I hope everybody can hear us. I know we were playing around with different ways of setting up the microphones earlier, so hopefully it will work okay. I'm delighted to be able to have Lisa in conversation here. Throughout the office, throughout the last couple of months, Lisa's project has been known as the Oral History Project in the office. So she's really been exploring what are the living memories of this building that we're going to inhabit in the future, Evans Home. But Lisa, you're an architecture graduate. Oh. So it's interesting to think in terms of what you're researching now and how that relates to your background as an architecture graduate.
This has been a really nice opportunity to explore maybe a broader look at how you might research a building. Of course, it's really important, the construction, the form, the typology, and the aspects, you know, of how the building and why the building is made and all that. But I think it's really interesting as well to look at the human aspects of the building, especially when there's the opportunity to look at the context of living memory, and things like how people would perceive the building, how they'd relate to it, things that you don't grasp by just reading the drawings of the building or just visiting it, that you mightn't quite get all of that from it. And it adds sort of a richness to the life of the building and captures an aspect that I think is really important. So it's been a nice opportunity to do that.
Yeah, particularly with Evans Home, I suppose. It has such a rich history, some of which we've explored during Gerry's walking tour today, which was absolutely fantastic. And I know, no doubt we'll hear more about that a little bit later. But for the purposes of your research and the memories that you were trying to harvest, I suppose, from Evans Home, how did you find the people that you wanted to talk to? How did you go about that?
Lots of different ways. When I began, there were a certain number of people that were suggested to me that might be a good starting point from, which was very helpful. Lindsay Butler and Anna O'Sullivan were both very forthcoming with suggestions. And one of the things that happens with a project like this is that you start talking to people and then they mention somebody else, and then you've got so many people that you can't even get to all of them, which is great. The other thing I did, I suppose it seemed like a good way of approaching it as I got into it, to realise, it was going to be a broad look at the building. Maybe I wasn't going to meet somebody who knew the entire history, but I was going to get bits and put it together into a picture from lots of people. So I was very interested in talking to people who had either run businesses or grown up or lived nearby, or even people who would have a broader experience in Kilkenny but a strong memory or association with the building. So the question of what's the building like if you're its neighbour, really, that was a thing I got very interested in.
So you went knocking on doors then, around here, around John Street. And I know that we have people in from around this area, people who run businesses, like you say, and perhaps some people who live around the area here. I know that you have some sound clips that you're going to share with us. So do you have anything in terms of what you found out from the neighbours of the building? Yeah,
there's a few short clips here speaking to people about their perception of the building, and you're going to hear three people here: David Fitzgerald, the former Lord Mayor, Declan Macaulay of the Local Studies in the Library, and Willie McTiernan, who would have grown up in the area, and they're all going to speak various aspects of that question, so give it a go. Not quite. Sorry, I'll just try that again there.
It all looks very technical from this side of things. I don't really understand what's going on, but thankfully Lisa does, so it's all right. We're in safe hands.
Hopefully. Sorry, I think I just had a hiccup. No. It's playing out of the computer, it's not playing out of the computer.
And like everything, earlier on when we were doing our technical run through, this ran very smoothly. But I also have, if we run into too much difficulty, we can call on our wonderful funder, Lindsay Butler. She might do a song for us, or a rap maybe, or something of that nature.
Sir? No, Evans Home was certainly in recent history was an unvisited, unknown part of the city. It was only known to a very small group.
No, I would say, there was a lot of buildings like Evans's and spaces in Kilkenny when I was growing up like that. Everyone knew Kilkenny was very historic and all that. People lived in Kilkenny like with lanes and things like that, never gone up those lanes or anything. And it's like with the castle, the amazing amount of people in Kilkenny who've never actually been inside the castle, actually grown up, and they all know they love the castle, but that's as far as it goes. And you usually hear, I often used to hear things about the castle from people, mates of mine in Dublin, who more likely to hear the castle than I did, because I haven't gone to tour of the castle in years now. But for your friends down, they all go on to tour of the castle and come back and tell you, they've opened up that wing now and all that sort of thing. And I'm living here and I work in local studies. But I think Evans is even more so, because unless you had a relative up in the home there or something, you never would.
Yeah, but it wasn't the place that was the general public access to. Yeah. I think I might have been in it once, You know, I don't think it was ever now, and even growing up in John Street, I mean, I grew up right beside it, and there wasn't a sense that it was there. It was, because it was up the lane, it was kind of almost like hidden away. You know, it wasn't something that you were very aware of, because it was in behind the church.
Yeah, that's interesting, right at the end there, to hear that it was up the lane and hidden away. And so this project has been extremely, as Anna said, been extremely significant for the Butler Gallery, because what we hope to do, of course, is open it up and make sure that it's anything but hidden. But it's interesting to hear that aspect of overlooked and unknown kind of coming up again and again in those clips.
And it's an interesting thing when you're speaking to people about something that's very familiar to them, but maybe as somebody who's not from Kilkenny, you know, it's new to me.
Yeah.
So to me, it was really interesting that people kept talking about that aspect. You know, even people saying, I was playing in the lane, but I never went into the building, but I didn't really think much about it. You know, that it's sort of, all those things start to come together to give you an impression that you mightn't assume, and that people themselves think, that's not that interesting, but it's really interesting when it comes together. And the other thing that was amazing about that was I began to get the impression it was overlooked, and then I'd say very, very seriously, you know, and would you ever have met anyone? And people would be like, oh yeah, no, we knew the people, you know. So it's kind of the building that was the bit that seemed to be more private, whereas anyone who was running a business around the area would inevitably have known some of the residents. So it was a nice thing to sort of discover organically.
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy, I suppose, between the attitude towards the building and then, like you say, the residents being known around town. We've both had the experience of stepping inside this building in its current state. And in fact, even before the work started on the building, we both had an opportunity to visit. Later on, we're going to see some of Gypsy Ray's photographs of the building, which will be played on a loop here for you, so you'll all get a taste of it. But I know that, Lisa, you recorded some of your first impressions of that first visit, so I think it'd be interesting to hear some of that.
Absolutely. It seemed kind of, as we could see, it's changing quickly. It seemed worth just noting the things that were right in front of us, so that's exactly what this is. The last room on the corridor is number 6. This is at the extreme left of the corridor, if you come in through the door. This room is really bright. Again, I think it's a little bit misleading to look at what the rooms are like now, because the boarding has affected them. But this room looks really, really bright. It's a large corner room. On the same wall as the door, there's a walk-in cupboard again, and this one has a timber floor, 2 shelves, one of them about waist height, and the other one is about shoulder height. And then there's a series of hooks on the side wall again. They're a little bit crooked. There's a series of nails in between them. The door in this room, the entrance to the room is painted that seafoam green, and there's kind of a yellow magnolia sort of surround to the cupboard door and on the interior skirting and moulding. This room, when you walk in, there's a tiled area behind the door, which is weird. There's a fireplace beside that, jutting it slightly from the wall there, that piece of wall with the fireplace on it. And the fireplace area has been painted grey. Again, it has a load of soot dumped out the front of it. And just beyond the fireplace, there's the sink. The sink is surrounded by a dark timber veneer, and underneath it you can see an amazing, almost neon pink sort of rose pattern wallpaper. And actually it looks like somebody has been doing wallpaper archaeology in here. Under the brown there seems to be a kind of a beige with pale pink flowers on it, a kind of a climbing flower. And under that it looks like the neon one appears, and then under that there's a green and yellow and grey, and then under that again there's a teal and grey pattern that seems to be, I don't know if some of that is paint actually, maybe that was painted, but kind of a geometric pattern that looks almost Egyptian. There's layers of paint in here as well. There's kind of a, you know, some of this is probably lining paper, but there's a kind of a yellow ochre.
I love that image of the layers of peeling wallpaper, kind of each layer peeling to reveal another layer, peeling to reveal another layer. And that's something that we both remarked on, I think.
Yeah.
The wallpaper archaeology, as you very poetically put it in the piece there.
I think the patterns were really amazing. That's, that you just see so much that you imagine being, surrounding people's lives in there. It made it very rich to see all of that piled up on top of each other.
Yeah, and the little aspects of like that of normal everyday life inside this building that were still evident. The hooks on the wall, hanging a little bit crookedly, and the various different colour paint and all the rest of it. It sprung to mind that idea that when you're peeling back, literally physically peeling back layers of paint or layers of wallpaper, it's as though you've taken a chop through a tree trunk and you're tracing the rings around to see how old the tree is or something. You're looking into the history of the building that way. Did many of the people that you spoke about know much of the bequest, Joseph Evans' bequest? I know we're going to hear a little bit more about the history in that respect from Gerry, but were many of the people that you spoke with aware of the history?
There was one conversation that was very interesting, and I'd love to hear in context with Gerry's understanding as well. There's, kind of speaking to somebody in conversation, that you're capturing part of it, and there's so much to the story of Joseph Evans. But speaking to one of the people I interviewed, Liam Keane, who would have been previously involved or known the building as a social worker, he said a few very interesting things about the bequest. Maybe I'll let him say them himself.
Great.
No, then the conditions that were put on it, because at that time there was quite a serious debate about who were the destitute poor and who were effectively the sort of mendicant poor, the beggars, and the people who were the able-bodied idlers, is what they were termed. Now he left his home available to the destitute poor, of which there would be many at that time, because of pregnancy, because of various things, unwanted pregnancies, people who had disabilities. Like if you look at, say, in France, I know but in France, the paint, the gleaners, the paintings by the Brabazon era, the gleaners were the poorest people in France. They were the people who were so poor and so destitute that after harvest was done and things like that, they were allowed to go onto the fields and gather what was left. So you had a tradition across Europe of destitute poverty. And ways of dealing with it. So that's where the gleaners come from. They're literally the destitute poor who are allowed to come and collect those things. Really charming stuff. But anyway, so he bequeathed his home. Now, under the terms then of it, there were a number of conditions made on it. One was you had to be destitute poor. There was no way you were getting in there. But the other very interesting one, which created a major problems later on, was that no rent could be charged on the people who came in there because they were destitute poor. So Evans Home was effectively a rent-free facility for poor people. Now, what happened subsequent to that, in bits and stats, I suppose, is the state came into being, the Free State came into being, and with that, the whole welfare thing, the whole social housing programme, under De Valera in particular, I suppose, in the 30s, that began to take hold. Yeah, where local authorities provided social housing, and not only just local authorities, but religious organisations, but mainly local authorities provided local housing. And then you had the welfare state, which came after that in the late 50s, following the beverage ban in Britain and the social welfare ban. So two things kicked in that made Evans Home a bit of a kind of an anomaly in the system. One was the provision of accommodation by the state, and the other was provision of welfare or money for welfare by the state.
This notion of the destitute poor versus the idle poor, was that something that you had come upon before, Lisa, or?
No, I hadn't, and it seemed, in terms of thinking, I suppose, of the later part of the house's lifespan, and I certainly don't have familiarity with the legal, financial, or any the practical aspects from that point of view. But it's interesting to think about that. That you set up a system with a certain goal in charity or philanthropy, and then the circumstances of the society around it change, and maybe some things end up stuck where they began rather than being able to be adapted. But it's an interesting question. I certainly don't know all of the answers around it, but I found it an interesting point to come across anyway.
And I think in the publication that you hopefully will all have received, and if you haven't already received one, you can get one on when we're having tea. but we learn a little bit in the publication about some of the first residents of the home, and so I find that a fascinating question. You know, where is the place for the home after the government begins to provide housing for people who cannot provide it for themselves? In terms of the care of the home, when you were interviewing people who lived around this vicinity, or perhaps, you know, Michael Street, John Street, this area, how did people know very much about what happened inside the house, how it was cared for, how the people inside were looked after?
I found out a certain amount, and presumably there's people that we didn't come across in this that are part of the story too. I play a clip in a second, but there were other people mentioned. The dean was one of the trustees of the building, so there were, you know, the trustees taking care of the building. From that point of view, there was the period that I was mostly speaking to people about. There wouldn't have been anyone in the home looking after people, but there was the lodge, and there would have been a caretaker associated with the building there. So a number of people were mentioned in that respect. And there were also people who would have been involved through the charities. And I assume there were a lot more than I came across. And also, in relation to the dean and the trustees, it was interesting to find that Willie McTiernan, one of the people I spoke with, his mother, Bobby McTiernan, is the former bookkeeper, and so she would have, you know, you just see that there were a lot of people through different roles who had associations with it. So that was interesting, but maybe we could hear a bit more about the people that I did come across anyway.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I know, we would have seen them. You see, this used to be a shop. They used to come down here for their cigarettes, and Sam Cole used to live there in the lodge. And he used to come down. I particularly remember Sam. He used to come down for milk and bread.
Yeah, Sam Cole.
Sam Cole.
Yeah.
Now, are you getting little bits of flashes of...
Yeah.
But he didn't actually live in the home, he lived in the lodge there, and I particularly remember Sam coming in, because he'd come in for bread and milk, and when you tell him how much it was, you know, he'd always turn around and root in the purse, and then he'd turn around and he'd pay you.
She was basically worked as an administrator for them from 1988 to possibly up as far as 2010. She used to liaise with the caretaker there, who was Paddy Ronan was his name. Yeah, he lived in the lodge house at the entrance to it.
And then Jack Pearce and the wife were caretakers.
And they lived in the...
And they lived in the little lodge. And that.
How many people were working in the home?
In the home?
Yeah.
None.
People just lived here?
Lived here, that was it.
Right.
The only one I ever saw taking care of, he might get one or two now, but Sister Michael used to look after them.
And that was just sort of part of her...
That's it.
She wasn't here all the time?
Yeah. Oh, no. She come over here on her day off. God love her. No, that.
But there was a local nun that was out in the county hospital, Sister Michael.
Yeah, Michael Dunn mentioned her.
Yeah, no, she was very good. She'd come in there every week when she had spare time, and she'd clean the rooms from her, you know, even get volunteers to go in and paint up the room from. And the Vincent de Paul, there was a man up here who lived up in Michael Street, Kelty Murphy. He'd be a father now to Jim Murphy and Billy Murphy. They'd be well known in town. But himself now, he was the main man for the Vincent de Paul and this Sister Michael. And between them, they always did an awful lot of work to try and keep the upkeep of each room, like. Every year or second year they try and decorate each room, like, to give them a bit of pride in the room, like, you know.
And just to say quickly, sorry, that was Miriam and Lucinda Lewis, Willie McTiernan, Margaret Forrestal, Michael Dunn and Billy Brett.
Yeah, a good range of clips there about how people, you know, who people were familiar with, I suppose, and again, getting back to the relationship side of things rather than the building. So obviously Sister Michael got a mention a couple of times there for going in and making sure that people could take pride in the rooms that they had in Evan's home. I know that Lisa, you've been talking to, when we've had conversations in the past, you've been speaking about how you feel as though you're getting a really good overview of the of people's views of Evans Home that we hope to archive. We hope to archive all of this material, but no doubt there may be people here that have other experiences of Evans Home. And I know that you have some interviews set up for your final day with us here in Kilkenny, but we'd be very interested to hear if anybody here does have other experiences of Evans Home. Perhaps we could chat to you another time about that.
Yeah, no, I'd love to take, if anyone wanted to let me know, I'd take your name. But the thing is that when you're doing a project like this, the amount of the story you get depends on the people and the number of people you speak to. And we've made a good effort, especially with opportunities like Kilkenny People and the Soon None show, you know, to reach a broader audience than just knocking on doors. But inevitably, there's part of the story missing, and it'd be lovely to find it.
Yeah, I think we've made a good start on compiling a bit of a sound archive of this living memory that we're hoping to explore. And if we can explore it further, then hopefully we will. But I think we owe a great debt of gratitude to Lisa Cassidy, because it's not an easy thing to do, to speak to knock on doors and to ensure that people are comfortable enough to share their stories with you. And Lisa has done that fantastically here, I think. So we're very grateful for that, and we hope to find a home for these lived memories in the future use of Evans Home as well. So thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you, and thanks.
So I want to welcome Gerry Kearns up to the stage, and just while Gerry's getting set up, I just want to introduce who we are, Rosie and myself. Obviously, we're not working for the Butler Gallery, but both of us, and Tara Kennedy, who's here, and Joanne Butler, work for an organisation called Commonage, which is based in Callan, so not too far away. But we were really excited at an opportunity that the Butler Gallery gave us to come in and invite researchers in and to kind of take, I suppose, hold of this project and see what we could make of it. And it's been a really exciting, very interesting year for us, especially to extend beyond Callan and into Kilkenny and be able to do some research here, because we do quite a lot with the built environment in Callan too. So that's us. I also just want to talk a little bit about the publication and what's inside it. The front cover is actually a photograph taken by the archaeologist who's been doing the dig in Evans Home, Orla Scully, who I think is here somewhere. And the photographs inside the publication are taken by Gypsy Ray, and Gypsy Ray is one of the people who's been working on this project. We've had input from all of the people. So Gerry here is a Professor of Human Geography at the National University of Ireland at Maynooth, and Karen Till, also a geographer who we'll see later, and obviously Lisa and Gypsy are the four people working on it. So I'll let you take over it, Gerry.
Okay, what I thought I would do is let you see some slides from today's field walk, and while they're playing, I would just like to share a few remarks about the three incarnations of the Evans Home and how they might relate to its future, and how its past can be something with which we can think about its future. That thinking critically about the past can be a resource for imagining different kinds of futures. The first incarnation of the Evans Home was as a priory. It was temporarily a place for the order that becomes the St. John's Ambulance, the St. John's Hospitalier, St. John's of Jerusalem. But they only were there for a very short number of years before a Dominican order was offered the priory, and they moved in, and it became St. John's Priory then. But the thing that strikes me about that period is that it was in fact a project of urban development. The church was being used as an agent of economic and social development. The Lord of Leinster, who controlled the town of Kilkenny, or who gave to the burgesses of the town of Kilkenny certain liberties, certain rights, he invited the friars into this location in order to organise this urban space across the river. On the other side of the river, there was the walled city, with the castle at one end and St. Canice's Cathedral at the other. That part of that over there was organised as burgesses and freemen, the regular form of feudal town. Outside the walls of a city were called the suburbs, the less than real, the less than properly urban. But they were also the places onto which cities grew. But in order to have a city grow properly, it had to have institutions. It couldn't just be allowed to higgledy-piggledy, my black hen, just pop up. It needed people who'd make an investment in the social relationships that would hold the community together. And the friars were given that task, and in return for discharging that task, they were given certain income. They were given Magdalen Mills across the way here, a set of a manufacturing area that paid rent to St. John's Priory, and with that money, the community of friars were able to do their work. And I think that this is a very important and interesting feature of the history of this site, that in fact it was central to the suburban development of Kilkenny. The suburban development of Kilkenny followed up this road out of town. But it didn't just happen by nature, it happened by design, it happened by institutions, and institutions which had proper financial basis. So someone had to put these things together in order to allow this community to thrive. And in thinking about the idea of the development of a new cultural district on this side of the river, to reanimate this part of Kilkenny, it's somewhat appropriate that this location should again be called upon to house the institution which might play a big role in that. That just as the Priory had played this institutional role in pulling together a community and enabling it to deal with the challenges of its day, so now we have other institutions that might perform some of those social and economic functions. So thinking about what the Priory did might provide us with some aspirations for what the new Butler Gallery might do. So that's the first incarnation of this building. Over here, this was part of it. I'm sure you all know that the Priory had an enormous footprint. I mean, this was just one end of it. We're at one corner, but in fact, if this is the corner here, we're talking about an area that's this big, that goes all the way through where the Evans home is, up to that far wall, and then all the way down to the wall that divides the Carnegie Library from here. So it was a very big institution. It was an economic powerhouse, a social powerhouse for this part of town. As we know, the history of religion in Ireland is extremely troublous, and at various times in the period when this was a religious institution, it had to cope with serious political disruption. Not only the dissolution of the monasteries, 1539, that closes it down, the recovery of this site for a Catholic function during the period of the Kilkenny, the Confederacy, the 1640s. It becomes a Jesuit college, but then when Cromwell takes the town, that's closed down. It becomes a military hospital. And as part of the way that the New English, who came in with Cromwell, who took over the houses, took over the farms, took over the businesses of many of the Irish, as part of the way of giving those New English some sense of security, the New English took two of the iconic institutions of Kilkenny and flipped them. It took this Priory and it took St. Francis Priory on the other side of the river, and instead of them being institutions of Catholic influence in the town, they were turned into military barracks. This was turned into an infantry barracks with 3 companies, probably 300 to 350 soldiers, and St Francis on the other side was turned into a cavalry barracks with 2 companies, probably about 250 soldiers. So you had about 600 English soldiers where you used to have 2 communities of friars. So this second incarnation of... I'm glad I can't see that. This second incarnation of the Evans home then was as a military barracks. It was established as a military barracks in 1698, and that military barracks had an architectural footprint rather similar in scale to the current Evans home. It was pretty much the same length. It was a slight H shape rather than a U shape, but similar in scale to the current Evans home. Now, there was much smaller building footprint than the previous priory. So in a sense, this barracks sat inside a ruined field, and this was a field of ruined masonry. So you had this semi-ruined church at this end. In fact, as time went on, increasingly ruined church at this end, and then bits of masonry all over the place, statues discarded and so on. The stories of travellers who came to Kilkenny and visited the barracks is that the ground around the barracks was just littered with the debris from the destruction of this priory. So it was a very iconic space of the insertion of new English power into what had been a Catholic institution. And yet these institutions were very important to the security of the English who lived here, and even of the Irish property owners who lived here. So all through the 18th century, Kilkenny, like much of Ireland, or certainly much of the Midlands, was subject to the social disruption that was associated with the White Boys, who were people who, through terrorism and intimidation, really tried to prevent tax collecting by the English. That was their form of anti-colonial struggle, was to make it impossible to collect taxes by terrorising tax collectors, taking them out of their houses at night and cutting off their ears and slitting their noses and murdering them, or whipping them and parading them through town naked on horses and so on. It was a time of real terror, of real fear, and these institutions, these barracks, spoke to that time. Now, insofar as that kind of story can have anything to say to us, it should, I think, remind us just how much violence, belief, and sincere belief even can carry. That the religious struggles of the 16th, 17th century, the anti-colonial struggles, and so on, they produced for many people real pain. And I think that if you're going to build up cultural institutions, recognizing that, in a sense, we live on salted earth, and we live in a place that has been turned over violently, that might give people a sense of responsibility towards civility, recognizing just how precious it is that you can have discussion without rancor, that you can have disagreement without violence. It's not always been the case, and it might not always stay the case. And cultural institutions may play a role in cultivating civility, cultivating the civility for a multicultural society, cultivating civility for a multi-faith and a no-faith society. And that responsibility, I think, one might remember that by remembering that this was a barracks, that they went out from this place and collected people and hanged them. And that bloody history might help us have a sense of priority, of holding on to something that's different to that. The third incarnation of the Evans home was the Evans home. The barracks were not big enough to deal with all of the unrest that was in this area, particularly with the 1798 rebellion, which was a major insurrection and involved tens of thousands of English troops being moved through these areas. So they took this barracks and they moved out to a barracks which has a footprint about 10 times as big. If you actually go up to the James Stephens barracks at the top of the hill here, it's enormous. It really is enormous compared to the scale of the Evans home. I think the footprint must be 10 times bigger. I could measure it, but I think it's something like 10 times bigger. That's the barracks that they needed to deal with the kind of insurrection, the kind of violence, the kind of civil unrest that they faced in the late 18th century. So this was no longer fit for purpose. It wasn't big enough. It wasn't frightening enough. It didn't have enough dungeons. It couldn't hold enough soldiers. And the place fell into disuse. And in 1828, Joseph Evans, who was one of these New English, his family came over with Cromwell. His family had very large landed estates in rural Kilkenny, but he left his entire estate, his entire fortune, to create a charitable trust for Protestants. And the purpose of Evans' bequest initially were a whole series of things to make the life of Protestants in Kilkenny easier, particularly poor Protestants. So it was money to help poor Protestant girls become attractive enough to become married Protestant women. It was money to allow poor Protestant boys to take up apprenticeships and find well-paid work. It was money to allow the education of Protestant children in an infant school, which was, in fact, the ground floor of the Evans home at various periods. And it was money, finally, to establish living quarters for 12 male ex-servants, retired servants, destitute ex-servants, and 12 female destitute ex-servants, with a preference that they should be Protestant. So this was established as a Protestant charity to help the Protestant poor in a town where the Protestant influence was in serious decline. At the time that Evans set up this charity, the Protestant share of the population of Kilkenny was at an all-time low. The Protestant share of Kilkenny was about 1 in 4 in the late 17th century after Cromwell, and then it declined steadily. And by the time that Evans left his money, it was 1 in 25. It recovered a little bit in the second half of the 19th century. It got up to 1 in 10 before tailing off again. So Evans established this bequest to deal with people that would otherwise have not had so many chances in life. But it was a sectarian bequest. It was intended for one group of the community. Over time, the problem that the Evans bequest had was that it couldn't find enough poor Protestants to lavish its money upon. By the time of the 1901 census, which is the first time we can really look at this in detail, there actually weren't 24 retired Protestant servants living on their own. There were only 42 in 1911. There were only 42 single Protestants over the age of 55 living on their own, and so and not many of them were servants. They'd had to have actually press-ganged people to actually fill it up. So what happened over time was that the Evans bequest became just general purpose poor person's home, and in a sense then it lost its original purpose. The thing that this makes me reflect upon is the nature of social inclusion and the nature of abandonment, and the question of who is abandoned and what happens to people who are abandoned. In a sense, one could think of of these elderly people who have no one else to turn to. They've no one else to turn to. That's, you know, when I've looked them up in the census, the people who lived in the Evans home in 1901 and 1911 said they had no living children. They were either widower, or single. They were people without other people in the town to turn to. They were living in what an anthropologist, Zhao Biel, calls a zone of social abandonment. And the question I think the Evans home might pose to a new cultural institution, alongside the question of the potential that a cultural institution might have for the development of a community, alongside the potential that a cultural institution might have for increasing the civility of a community, is what can a cultural institution do to improve and address the questions of social inclusion within a community? Thank you very much.
So, thanks everyone. So we're going to have a little bit of a roundtable discussion now, and the people in front of you: Anna Sullivan, obviously is director of the Butler Gallery. Gypsy Ray is a local photographer from Kilkenny, originally from the United States, who has been into the building, documenting it, and all of the images that you see projected up here. These are all Gypsy's photographs, and obviously, as I mentioned earlier, some of them are in the publication. Karen Till is a currently visiting fellow at the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Study, and she's a cultural geographer also at NUI Maynooth too. And Karen has also written an essay that's, I suppose, a little bit more of a poetic reflection on experiences of the building in relation to the research of the other people who are involved in the project. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Holly. As you can see here, we have the wonderful photographs of Gypsy Ray in the background, and I think anyone that has been in the building has taken away their own personal memories or images, that be it the coal scuttle in the corner, or ashes left in the grate, or the utensils left in the kitchen, and as was spoken about earlier, the layers and layers of wallpaper. And you do come across an awful lot of holy relics in the space, or even just very kitschy little photographs. But and these, a room of one's own really comes to mind, because the rooms are, all the inhabitants had a room and a sink, and a coal shovel, a fire. It was most of them had a sink. Very minimal, very basic kind of place, but must have been actually a haven for people who had nowhere else to go. And so it was one of the overriding feelings about Evans Home, I think, that all of us have felt, that was really echoed by what Lisa found in her research, was that it was a sad place. It was in some respects, it was a place where individuals went that had nowhere else to go and no family, and that really kind of resonates as you walk through the space and you see scraps and artifacts of lives that mostly have passed on. But I think Gypsy was a wonderful addition to this project, in that with her own very particular eye she captured a really great sense of this time, this changeover, the transition between where it is now and what it will become. But so I'd just like to ask Gypsy about perhaps describing your experiences when you went there. You had quite a few visits, and besides the overriding smell of mold and the disturbing books that were piled up, what sense did you get? Did it change over the few times that you were there, and what are you left with now?
I think, one thing which was wonderful is I was able to get keys from Anna and go over to the building on my own. So for somebody who's a visual artist, that was really wonderful, because I didn't have any distractions in terms of somebody else that I had to talk to. Sometimes I take the dogs just for safety, but that was really wonderful to do. So I think the first few times it was little bit disconcerting, an old building, abandoned. And it's true, that just what was inside of it. And over time, it's almost, what I created was almost visual fiction, because I've never had to live in that condition. You just kind of know a bit about the history of it. So I'm just visually interpreting what I found there.
Do you feel that you were impressing something of your history upon how you were taking photographs as well? I suppose your eye would be drawn to things that would catch your eye.
I don't think history so much as I think of just what I'd be visually interested in.
Yeah.
Because I knew that I needed to do some documentation, but I also knew that I was free to just interpret. And I probably was more excited about the interpretations than I was about the documentation.
Because that's what we are seeing here. We are seeing kind of documentation of the exterior and some of Orla Scully's archaeology and how that changed the space over time. Of course, when we all first visited there, it was the home for the Borough Council's planting. They were there for a long time. They were kind of sad to leave it because I think they've ended up now in an industrial estate, which is it was really hard to leave because, while the building was not something they engaged with, it was the grounds around it are really quite pretty and with trees and quiet little enclave in the middle of Kilkenny. So any other thoughts though on the experience? What are the most overriding memories you have of it now?
Well,
but you're a visual artist,
yeah,
so words are hard for you to put in or to put that experience into.
I think the experience comes out in some of the photographs that are for me more personal. Maybe this one even, or the ones of the like the religious icons kind of on peeling wallpaper or that. And again, that idea that I'm reading visually into what those lives may have been like by what was left.
Yeah.
In terms of what was left of the building as it's deteriorated and what was left of the few things left by people like Christmas decorations.
Yeah.
Or an empty basin or...
We were pretty limited, though. I mean, there was very little left as far as personal history. It had been cleared a lot over a number of years, and then it had been a repository for the libraries for the library services, and so that took on its own sense of place within it as well. But I suppose all the various colours and peeling paint. It's kind of melancholy kind of feeling, I suppose, for the most part, as we go through it.
And that was the one sunny day of the summer.
It was a struggle to find
Anna
the blue
kept
skies.
wanting a photograph of the building that made it look good, and you remember the summer. That was really hard to do.
Perhaps I should turn to you, Karen, and but before getting into your essay, I'd love to know, what does a cultural geographer do? It sounds great, sounds very fancy, but what does a cultural geographer do? I mean, we kind of got a sense of what you did here in Kilkenny, but in general, what does that job entail?
Well, I probably would use a definition of geography that my PhD supervisor, Ifu Tuan, gave. And he was interpreting one of the fathers of geography, Alexander von Humboldt. And he said, geography is how humans turn the world into a home. So there's physical elements, there are cultural elements, there's symbolic elements. And so, an Evans home, which is a social institution, is a place that was built to take care of people. But the description that you're talking about, the personal artifacts, how we lay things out, it's whenever you move somewhere, you put your things in, and you maybe have your own little shrine, or you put pictures up in a certain way. So the objects are there, but it's also then your movements and your rhythms. It's what we do to feel at home and to make our places in the world. So that's one of the ways we can think about geography.
Fascinating. Well, you were a really good person to get on board with this project, because you did address various aspects of the life of the building and the site, be it the sense of abandonment, the archaeological site, the repository, and the future use of the building. Can you tell me how, what kind of research that you did that led for this eventual essay and what you came up with?
Well, by training, I'm an ethnographer, so I usually observe a lot and do a lot of research about a place in terms of different types of histories or readings before I start talking to people. And this time I didn't do a set of interviews structured with people or what I would normally do. So I, in a way, perhaps because it's more of a creative impressionistic piece, I was maybe trying to have a conversation with this place. And one of the things that ethnographers do is to also try to think about the everyday as telling a lot. What we take for granted can, open up richness, whole different worlds, whole different possibilities. And places I also think of, and this is because of the sorts of places I do research about, as also possible thresholds through which we can come into contact with those who've gone before, as well as those who might come after us. Places will be there long after we're not here. And all places have had these different imprints of different lives, humans and non-human lives, to make it what it is. So there are a couple things going on in this essay then. Places also change at different moments in time, and so the first kind of impression I had was all of the different types of activities that happened at one moment in time. That happened at many moments in time, but at this one moment in time that I first, met the Evans house, so to speak, it was through different objects. It was through, the books, it was through the peeling, wallpaper, the pictures. And so I kind of tried to tell a story about different aspects of the different places of the Evans home, in a way by tracking a story of more or less of an object. And the object might lead me somewhere that I wouldn't expect. A key can also be a metaphor. It can open doors. It can give us, entries into new pathways and possibilities. Bones speak to us of life and death, and also of a kind of archaeological imagination. But it is also the idea of a bone and disarticulated human remains. It's also a cemetery. The people did live and probably died here.
You got a chance to work with, to meet with Orla during the archaeology.
Yes, and you'll see that in the third, kind of short vignette. And I tried to capture as best I could a little bit, probably quite inadequately also, Orla's voice in that piece. So again, I tried to also have somewhat of a different voice for each of the different parts that I wrote as well. But Orla was very, very generous and gave us an incredible tour, and you probably get a sense of it from some of the pictures here too. But what was really quite impressive also was how unusually clearly layered this archaeological site was. So here, the picture with the round was with the round picture was before it was unearthed. So some of the images that you're seeing here are different periods of time, right? When it was a garden, and then it became an archaeological dig site. And it truly transformed my experience of encountering this particular place. So you do see different times, but it's also just my responses to the places and how to think through what I'm experiencing in the moment, what might have happened in the past, and also thinking about future possibilities, because that's part of the reason we were invited.
Yeah, and that is, there's so many aspects to this project that have such resonance for the future, because what we really want to do with the material is to reinsert those stories back into the home when it becomes a new building, when it becomes infused with life and exhibitions and families and children and participating and enjoying the arts in the space. I think that what we'd like to, so while it might be photographs by Gypsy, and Gypsy did a whole array of other ones, black and white photographs as well, that we will probably frame and have in some part in the home at some point in time. The oral history will be available. So it's really great for us to think that that will eventually find its way back into the to take it into the next 100 years and recognise that. A lot of times with these group, we never have enough time for conversation, and I think there's quite a few people in the audience that had an input up to now, and I think we're going to turn the lights up so that if you have any questions or anything to add, we'd love to sort of open this up to the group, to people who have made an effort to come here tonight. We're going to turn up. Yep, yeah, that's fine. I know we're lucky enough to have Orla Scully here tonight. Don't want to turn on you, Orla. Is she still here? Yeah. The archaeologist who was working, it's very true what Karen said. Orla, you were always so generous to anyone that came to walk us around. You showed us some amazing things that you had found. And do you have would you be comfortable enough with sharing a little bit of some of the works the artifacts that you found, especially the tiles, which were fascinating. But in your own time, do you have something to share with us about your experience on the dig?
Well, it was a beautiful dig. It was a privilege to dig it, and it was a beautiful space, which I loved being there because it was enclosed, it was quiet, it was like an oasis in the city. The site was brilliantly the stratigraphy was laid out so clearly because you had the home was sitting on the debris of the infantry barracks, and we found the cellars of the infantry barracks, and we found the imprint of it. It was wider and shorter, and the rear wall of Evans's home is built on the front wall of the infantry barracks. It was cellared in both ends, and we found the stone walls of the cellars, and we found bits of medieval stonework actually reused in the walls of the barracks. But the barracks before that had torn down the priory, so the ruin, it itself was sitting on the ruins of the priory. So you had under the cobbles of the infantry barracks. First of all, there were cobbles of the same date as Evans's home, which are preserved and under that white plastic you saw on Gypsy's photos. And then that sealed a layer of destroyed infantry barracks, and there were cobbles associated with that. And those cobbles in turn sealed the rubble debris of the pulled down priory. Yeah. So in only one area where we went deep for the water tanks for the proposed gallery, we were allowed to go deepest in that area, and that's where we found the remains of the priory, which were very unusual, and we're still waiting on specialist reports, but we have medieval tiles which are unique to Kilkenny and seem to be linked with the High Hayes pottery kiln, the same fabric and possibly the same period.
The kiln. There was one of the photographs was the kiln, wasn't
yes,
it?
but not a pottery kiln, possibly a lime kiln. But Colleen O'Driscoll had found a pottery kiln under the McDonagh Centre a few years ago, so we seem to have a link with that site. So we had human burials, we had tiles, we had some medieval pottery, but a particularly strong amount of 17th, 18th century pottery called North Devon sgraffito ware, which is associated probably with the infantry barracks. Lots and lots of that, and those reports will be in the new year, and we'll have the final report done then. So it was a privilege to dig it, and it gave some fairly graphic textbook layering through time, culminating in the home, which is a beautiful space. And I think, if I could add one thing about the future of it, I think that the council should be persuaded to break down the trees between the back of the library and the site, so that from the river and from across town you can see the gallery and open it up more. That's my own personal view. Plus, we could excavate more. We could get out to the mill stream and link the old mill race with the site, which would be nice.
That'd be great, amazing.
Thank you.
Definitely, thanks very much. Has anyone got any questions? Because all of the speakers are here, and Gerry and Lisa, we're all available for anything that you might like to add, any burning questions you have about Evan's home, or if there's anyone here that has anything to add if they had an experience that Lisa hasn't actually met you or captured. We'd love to hear from you. Anyone?
Diana, just back to the last comment there in relation to the mill race. I was hoping Paddy Nowry from Wolftown Street would be here tonight, but he was telling us the geography of the mill race, which was that effectively it ran from Queensbridge down to where the library is now, and was down there and seemed to serve as a water source for Evans's home. And for that reason, that was how the lake was created, which is where the lake school and that terminology came from. But I think there are very few traces of it left now, which is a shame. But somebody else had the view today that was the Mayor's Walk along from the library. There's much debate and discussion about that the corporation opened that up as the Mayor's Walk in the 1840s at that time. So I think there's we're finding out stuff today I think that's fascinating, and hopefully maybe some of those remnants will end up on. We had a meeting on Wednesday night in relation to St. Mary's Church and the developments that will take place there in a museum, and really one of the urgent things is that we'll have a home for the artefacts which have been uncovered by the archaeology, whether it's in Evans's home itself in time or in hopefully a new city museum in St. Mary's.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody else got something to add at all? An opportunity here with the various speakers.
Yeah, hi there. Just as a past student of the Lake School, I have a memory of my sister who was a few years older than us. Her class were invited to go down and to meet some of the residents in Evans's home. It never happened in my year, but I do recall going with my older sister to visit one of the particular ladies who lived there. And just as you were talking earlier on, I think it'd be very interesting maybe to look at an oral history network and looking maybe at some of the girls' memories of visiting some of the ladies. I think that might be a very interesting point of view to see the whole focus on preventing social isolation at that time. It probably would have been perceived as very progressive, over 30 years ago, that young girls at say 13 years of age would have been encouraged to go in and to befriend some of the ladies in the Evans's home with the aim of reducing some of their loneliness. I think that might be interesting. I know
there's a whole generation, I think, of people that visited folks that lived there, especially at Christmas and whatnot, bringing hampers, and it would be great to capture their stories because they would, so many of the men and women that lived there have passed on, and it would be great to have that intimate, stories about what they were like and what it was like to live there. I think that would be excellent.
Telling somebody I was coming to this event tonight, and her memory was that Eamon Langton and his wife Trish provided Christmas dinners, and every Christmas they would bring over the dinners to the ladies as well. I think those sorts of nuggets of information would really bring it to life for people who, mightn't maybe have the niche interest that some of us here tonight might have, but would open it up to the public and make the Butler Gallery a lot more interesting and relevant and appealing to a lot of people maybe who have a vague memory of Evans's home.
Excellent, yeah.
There's actually hours and hours of footage that kind of audio footage that Lisa has recorded, so I think there's probably a lot more kind of information that would come up in that as well, if any of us interest to kind of sit and listen to it all. I think it's really great that will be in the Butler Gallery. I actually had a question for Karen that I thought might be interesting, which is, as a geographer, that you were saying you made a poetic and what you described as impressionistic response to the building in your essay. I thought it was really interesting, Gypsy, that you were talking about imbuing the photograph with your own sort of interpretation of the building as well. And I know that, Karen, you've responded quite a lot to Gypsy's photographs and felt they were very important. And I just wonder, could you speak to the sort of two layers of responding to a building, but also another person's interpretation of the building through the photographs as well?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'd take a long time to absorb as much as I can before I really begin writing. It's a very scary process. It's hard to write. It's a very scary process to write. So when Tara and Joanne invited me to, be one of the writers of the project, I was a little bit nervous, especially because I'm new to Ireland. I at the time was invited, never been to Kilkenny before. And I thought, how can I do the kind of scholarly research that I do normally? And in the conversations, the artists were telling me, you pretty much have the skill to do it. Just let these different waves kind of go over you. And then I realized also that the way that I work is I do try to listen to people and see and observe how people respond and interact, and then I learn a lot from just listening. So I did a lot of listening to the research team, to Lisa, to Tara and Joanne, and talking to you and to Rosie and you, and then also looking at Gypsy's images, and again getting the tour from Orla. And what was striking for me, especially for Gypsy's images, is that there were certain kinds of visual kind of responses that she had that were, very beautiful and aesthetic, and they're very, very similar to my own. So they spoke exactly to the things that I had taken down in my notes as being really just full, just needing some kind of attention. So the key on the wall. There were more than one. In fact, I think the image of the one that you took wasn't the one that I really responded to, but it just, this very unusual sort of object on this wall after you've been going through and looking at the rooms and trying to get a sense of who lived here. It was just so poignant. I mean, it's just so filled with possibility and just something I had never seen before. I just had never seen anything that looked like that before. It was a very distinctive experience, and Gypsy captured that so evocatively, visually. And the other thing I think too with writing, and you do have such richness and texture in your visual images, but you lose things like smell and sound, and you get movement, you get a bit of movement with words in terms of how you are going into a space that you've never been before, and you have this incredible amount of sensory overload, but you're also having different things happening in your not just your body, but in your mind, and they do strange things. And so I wanted to get a bit of that movement also in the different vignettes, and part of that movement has to do with the conversations I had with people, with the research team. There is a bit of time and space moving around through the words and the descriptions, and so it's not like being a journalist and saying this is what I saw and trying to be really precise as describing like a scientific description. It's trying to catch a mood or a response or a set of relations and a set of conversations. So that's what I was trying to do.
Oh, great. Please.
Peter McQuillan, I'm from the Kilkenny Archaeological Society. I'd like to thank you all for what you have provided for us today and this evening. And the whole project is very exciting. In fact, what's happening in Kilkenny at the moment is very exciting. And it's great to see incremental improvements towards the achievements that we're aspiring to. It's great to see a home for the future for the gallery, and I'm very impressed by all the specialties that have focused on the interpretation of the location here and the site and the building itself, and its relationship with its community and its surroundings. And then I went up and I looked at the plans, and I just found a difficulty relating what we've been hearing and talking about to a sort of a cubic dark grey block tagged onto the side of the building here. And I just wonder if there's various specialties who've been looking at the relationships backwards looked at the relationships forward, and can we come to terms with the particular kind of design that's going to house the gallery in the future?
I suppose in response to that, the contemporary wing is contemporary. It is, right now it has a bronze cladding on it that will change colour in time, and the restoration of Evans Home will be done to the highest quality with the climate control wing dedicated to the Tony O'Malley works. And you know, you're certainly not going to find a space that everyone will love, but what we are doing with this contemporary edition is that we're providing a home to take the work that we own into the future in the best possible way, the storage of it, the presentation of it. You know, artists these days need a space that they can make their own, but this is a space that will, via the work within it, define its future use. The spaces, I'm happy enough with the way that the architects, we had a whole group of architects respond to Evans Home, and it will be rendered, it will be brought back to a limed surface that it was in its day when it, we've had some photographs of what it looked like at one time or other, and it'll look quite different to the way it is now while the stone is exposed. The contemporary wing will probably find it'll settle in its own way, it'll settle in time, and I think will you know, work well with the Evans Home eventually when the surface is limed. So, Peter, are you saying that you're not that happy with the way it looks, or you just find that you know, I know everyone will have an opinion about what way it should be. Does anyone else want to jump in there? Or?
All I can voice really is an opinion, and I know that the modern technologies required in housing artifacts and paintings and so on call for a lot of, you know, technology and installations of one kind or another, and space is needed to house them. I just thought that modern archaeology might have been able to house them in a less obtrusive, but still quite modern addition to the premises. But that's just an opinion that I'm expressing.
No, I hear you, and I think it'll settle in its time, and it'll look really well. I think the bronze cladding will change. There will be a light feature under the cladding that will have a personality all of its own as well, and it will be what artists deserve. I mean, the space deserves, and the collection and the work that we show there deserves a space that will take it forward. And I'm not sure if anyone else has any response to the architectural drawings. Yes, Karen, fire away.
I think it's hard to know what's going to happen with budgets and whatnot at this stage. I mean, I think we can imagine some from the sketches, and I think the architect is very sensitive in terms of trying to have a new building not overpower a really rich and interesting historical structure. So I think that conversation is very good. And I see that this project, the Interim Project, and the other projects that I imagine that the Butler is going to continue to explore will possibly also create ideas and inspiration for different kinds of outreach programs. So this is part of your educational and community outreach program, and I think that's exceptionally rich for an art gallery to already be engaging in. So I think some of the other spaces might not be the architectural ones, like the physical structure, but the social structures. And I think that's the potential here. And I think there is a responsibility here too, and this is one of the reasons I wrote this in my essay, is I think when we are going to think about pasts, like you said, we have to think about future responsibilities as well. And so also the Butler's starting to have a conversation with Kilkenny County Libraries and the conversation here with this parish, like you were saying, with the neighbors. I think that's very clear. And one of the things that I also wrote in my essay is that it seemed to me as an American not knowing Kilkenny, a very strong impression was that this side of the river was the other side of the tracks. You know, to use an American expression, kind of a bit abandoned and not really engaged. All the tourists and everybody and all the activities and a lot of the big historical structures are really clearly on the other side. So it was a real exciting moment for me to hear today from the mayor about the future, the bridge, this as a cultural center, the conversations that have existed in the past that they're envisioning for the future. So maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but I do think that this is part of what you're imagining in terms of a future cultural center.
I'm loath to come back in again, but I know other people have expressed similar opinions to Peter's, and I think two things I would say. Number one, to look across the river from Evans's home and to see the quality of the very contemporary extension put onto the courthouse. And also I would say to anybody who hasn't visited it, and I'm sure lots of people here have, the Northern Gallery in Sligo, and to see how they have done something very similar, very different architecturally, but very similar. And I think we actually have an obligation as a city to make our own architectural statements for the future in the way that the designers, the architects of Evans's home and the courthouse and Roth House and others made their statements at their time. And I also think very often architectural drawings don't do justice to the finished product, and I think it's really exciting, and I would look forward to seeing something of that nature there. The other question, I suppose, is what will happen to the Carnegie Library. It's just a question that came up here, and that's a part of the jigsaw that has to be figured out, because obviously there are plans for that in the context of the Arts Council, plans for decentralisation, but hopefully that will come in time. But I think the suggestion that the trees be taken down is one that will always be controversial, but I think it really would open up the Evans's home, which has been hidden for so long. So many people don't know it's there, even people who live in the city, and I think that's a shame,
Okay, I know we have a question up here.
Good evening, Joe O'Connell from Gerpine Park. I'm slightly off the track here now, because John's Priory had a connection to St. Nicholas's Church in Newtown, Gerpines, which is about 18 miles south of here. I wonder, could anyone fill me in on what that connection was? Like,
Might be the next part of the research. I think Gerry's probably the best.
A lot of the larger churches would have. I don't know the answer. Okay, so I'm purely speculating. But a lot of the larger ecclesiastical institutions in Kilkenny had benefices. In other words, they would receive some of the church rates raised in a number of parishes. So, for example, the deanery, the dean of St. Canice's had the benefits of 27 parishes in Kilkenny. So 27 parishes in Kilkenny raised money from their own parishioners, and a share of that money went to St. Canice's. So I don't know whether the connection was in the nature of the benefits that at Gerpoint part of the money raised came here. I don't know. I'll try and find out for you, though, if you give me your email.
Would it tie in with the tide wars?
Well, the tithe wars were a general attack, as you know, on the whole system of tithes in a country where the majority of the population were Catholic, and all the tithes were collected and paid to Protestants, but they were collected from Catholics. So the tithe wars were people who, particularly from the 1830s, they were really intense, where Catholics said, we will not pay these taxes to Protestant churches. We get no benefit from them. And yet those taxes were imposed by law. So you had situations where 95% of the population were paying taxes in some districts for churches that they never went into, for priests that they never received any consolation from. So the tithes were an attack on the whole principle of collecting money for Protestant churches from Catholic inhabitants.
But that could really be a different time.
That's a little later. The tithes are later. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There's one more question here.
Hey, Gypsy, your really incredible photographs have your signature all over them. Definitely your enduring sense of inexhaustible adventure for, or excitement for things that are relatively banal and making the innocuous incredible. When you were talking about your approach to this, I, in my own mind, was thinking of Richard Moss, Kilkenny's other very good photographer, who deals probably with more challenging subjects, but this is a fairly challenging subject in its own right. I was expecting you to say what he said about creating an aesthetic truth, but you said it was a fictional experience. Just wondering how you went about your approach to documenting what different modes of photography or uses or types of photography you used, and how you went about sculpting your work there.
Well, mainly those images were digital images, and again, that's because of the summer we had. I really like using this plastic camera that needs more light than was available this summer, but it gives you a really beautiful kind of ethereal effect. The results of the negative, the lenses on these cameras are so bad, they're wonderful. But I wasn't able to use it very much, which was disappointing, actually. I'd love to go back in and just do some for myself.
It'll be an opportunity.
You know, with that, when we have some sunny days. But mainly the work was digital imagery, and then some of it I translated just, you know, on the computer into black and white, because I liked them better as black and white images. So, but yeah, no, I'm pleased with a lot of them. Yeah, thanks, Gerry. Thanks.
I think we probably wrap it up now, and thank you all for your attention tonight. It was great to have that feedback. I guess we'll be going forward and taking Everett's Home into the 21st century. It may not be what everyone likes, but I think it will be a great future for a cultural centre for Kilkenny. We're so lucky that we will find a home at last to house our permanent collection, and we are so privileged that we will also be dedicating a wing to the works of Tony O'Malley, which will be fantastic for the people of Kilkenny, and I think for visitors to Kilkenny to appreciate. Our temporary exhibitions, we have an enormous dedication to education and community outreach in response to those exhibitions, and it will be fantastic to have a home of our own, out of the basement, above ground, into the light, and all that goes along with that. We are looking forward to that in the next couple of years. As I said earlier today, we really need to keep that that vision alive and present with you all and the Kilkenny community and elected members and whatnot to keep our project current. And we have come extremely far in that we have public money promised to the development from the Department of Arts and from Fáilte Ireland, and there will be some private money that has to be raised, but we're working really hard on really working on a fundraising plan, and also ways of being less dependent on public funding and revenue resources. And we're a tiny staff, but we're putting our energies towards how to be sustainable for the future. So exciting times ahead. I think it will be a really amazing centre for Kilkenny, and we just all want to try and make it happen. I want to thank again the Kilkenny County Council, local authority, through their grant from the European Regional Development Fund, made a big difference to this project, and the Department of Arts funding. It's never very much money, but the little bit of money that you get is so beneficial to be able to include so many great researchers to make this publication and this event happen. So we continue. This is a kind of phase one approach. We will continue with ambitious plans for the future to continue with this line of research, and just really want to thank the Culture Struction, Commonage, the various participants in that group that made this happen: Rosie Lynch, Holly Kearns, Tara Kennedy, Joanne Butler. Thank you to Sean O'Sullivan, who designed our publication, did a lovely job. To the contributors to the publication: Gypsy Ray, Karen Till, Gerry Kearns, Lisa Cassidy. Thank you so much for your input. And we're delighted to have Orla Scully here today as well, and that's great to have your input here tonight as well. And thank you to Barbara Ann Harkin, our education curator, who worked on this project for the last number of months as well. And for Lisa Cassidy. Did I mention Lisa? Yes, I did. Thank you, Lisa. We want more of Lisa Cassidy. And also, if you wouldn't mind, we've left a donation box out, suggested donation of €2. It just helps us with the publication and also helps us to go forward with our other plans and research for the future. It'd be really appreciated. Thank you all very much for coming. Do keep in touch with us. I hope we all have your email addresses or contact details so that we can share other projects with you in the future. And again, thank you to the parishioners of St. John's Priory for allowing us here today. Thanks very much.